Um, so I figured, okay, at the beginning of the play, the Frenchman would fantasize that he was Pinkerton, the American lieutenant in the opera about Butterfly, and that he found his butterfly. And that by the end of the play, the Frenchman would realize that it was actually he who's Butterfly, and that he was the one who was sacrificed for love, and the Chinese spy who perpetrated that deceit was therefore the real Pinkerton. And so once I knew that, I had basically my beginning and basically my ending, and I could start to write the play. The third thing that I need to write a play, which goes, I think the second one goes to the question of plot. So number one is about theme, number two is about plot, and number three is about tone and structure. And so the third thing I need is I tend to base my plays on other plays. And this is kind of like a lot of people who are writers base plays on characters on people they know. So you start writing a play about your roommate, and if the play is going well, by page 20 or so, that character is no longer your roommate. That character started doing things that your roommate has not done in real life, displaying characteristics that are different. But it kind of, basic character in your roommate gave you a way to kind of jumpstart the process. And it's the same for me in terms of basing plays on other plays. I don't think ultimately I ended up, well, in this particular case, with Butterfly, I ended up basing it on structure by Peter Shaffer. If any of you are familiar with the plays Equus or Amadeus or the movies that were made from each of those, it's a structure where you essentially have the main character and he's gone through some sort of traumatic event. So let's just talk about Amadeus, because some of you may have seen that. Amadeus, Salieri is the main character. This takes place, it's a play largely about Mozart, the composer. Salieri was another composer around the same time who was a rival of Mozart's, and some, according to legend, maybe murdered Mozart. So the play starts out with Salieri at the end of his life, and he starts to tell you about his relationship with Mozart. And then it flashes back to, you actually see those scenes where, Salieri is growing up and where he meets Mozart, and the actor plays himself, his younger self, in those earlier scenes. And Butterfly has basically the same structure. You have Gallimard, who has been exposed. Gallimard is the Frenchman in my play. And he's, there's been this terrible scandal. It's been exposed that he had an affair with a woman, who's actually a man. And he starts to talk to the audience and try to explain himself. And then it flashes back. And he plays himself in the younger scenes. The difference was that in the Shaffer structure, Salieri sort of tells the story through the whole thing. In my play, I kind of wanted to play with that there would be a fight for who gets to tell the story. So that in Act 1 of my play, the Frenchman tells the story. In Act 2, there's a struggle between the Frenchman and the Chinese character for who gets to tell the story. And in the third act, the Chinese character, at least at the beginning, gets to tell the story. So once I have those three things, I can write a play. I need to have a question, I need to have a beginning and an ending, and I need to have a play that I'm basing it on. And I'm going to read the scene where Gallimard, the Frenchman, and Sun Li-ling, the spy, meet for the first time. And they have just, Sun Li-ling was a Chinese opera actor / actress, has just, as sort of a lark, performed the death scene for Madame Butterfly to a bunch of diplomats at the German ambassador's house. And we're in Beijing in 1960. And Gallimard, the Frenchman, says to us, the audience, "They say in opera, the voice is everything. That's probably why I never before enjoyed it. Here was a butterfly with little or no voice, but she had the grace, the delicacy. I believed this girl. I believed her suffering. I wanted to take her in my arms, so delicate, even I could protect her. Take her home, pamper her until she smiled." And Sun says, "Excuse me, Monsieur." Gallimard says, "Oh, Gallimard, Mademoiselle, beautiful Sun Li-ling, a beautiful performance. Oh, please, you make me blush. I'm no opera singer at all." And Gallimard says, I usually don't like Butterfly. I can't blame you in the least. I mean, the story, ridiculous. I like the story, but what? And Sung says, oh, you like it. What I mean is, I've always seen it played by huge women with so much bad makeup. And Sung says, bad makeup is not unique to the West. But who can believe them? And you believe me. Absolutely, you were utterly convincing. It's the first time in Sung says, convincing. As a Japanese woman, the Japanese used hundreds of our people for medical experiments during the war, you know. But I gather such an irony was lost on you. And Gallimard says, no, I was about to say, it's the first time I've seen the beauty of the story, really, of her death. It's a pure sacrifice. He's unworthy, but what can she do? She loves him so much. It's a very beautiful story. And Sung says, well, yes, to a Westerner. Excuse me. It's one of your favorite fantasies, isn't it? The submissive Oriental woman and the cruel white man? Well, I didn't quite mean. Consider it this way. What would you say if a blonde homecoming queen fell in love with a short Japanese businessman? He treats her cruelly, then goes home for 3 years, during which time she prays to his picture and turns down marriage from a young Kennedy. Then, when she learns he is remarried, she kills herself. Now, I believe you would consider this girl to be a deranged idiot, correct? But because it's an Oriental and kills herself for a Westerner, you find it beautiful. Gallimard says, yes, well, I see your point. I will never do Butterfly again, Monsieur Gallimard. If you wish to see some real theater, come to the Peking Opera sometime. Expand your mind. She leaves, and Gallimard says to us, so much for protecting her in my big Western arms. One of the things that Butterfly deals with, I think, besides trying to kind of balance these images of men and women, East and West, is basically the fluidity of identity. And I feel like this is a theme that goes through a lot of my work. That whether or not I'm dealing with specifically East-West or Asian American subjects or not, it seems to be about how you think you're one person, and then you get put into a different context, and some sort of transformation takes place. You turn into someone else. And post and Butterfly, because of the success of it, I kind of went through a period where I became the official Asian American. Because it's sort of like the media can only kind of deal with one person. So I was the official Asian American for a while after, then Amy Tan, who at the Journal Club, Amy became And I began to realize, and this relates to this issue of authenticity, I began to realize, it's impossible for me to represent an entire community, for any one person to represent an entire community. Because a community is not monolithic. Not everybody, just because you're Asian or even Chinese American from Los Angeles, that doesn't mean you think the same way or see the world exactly the same as some other Chinese American from Los Angeles. So all I can do is kind of give my own perspective on something, and somebody else can give their own perspective. And an audience members can go, well, I like that person's work, but I don't like David's work. And that's how people define themselves. So that, no single artist can represent a community. Only a community of artists can represent a community. And so authenticity became something that I began to realize there is not a holy grail of authenticity. Things change, culture changes. And what is real to one person, what is truthful to one person, may not be truthful to another. In the wake of that, when I was the official Asian American, there was a controversy over casting a Broadway show, which was the musical Miss Saigon was coming to Broadway, and there was the lead role of the engineer, who is Asian or Eurasian, depending on how you look at it, and they were going to cast the actor who originated it on the West End, Jonathan Pryce, who's a Welsh actor, in this Eurasian role. And a lot of people felt that, a lot of Asians felt that this was sort of yellow-faced casting. And I joined in that protest. And it became sort of a big culture wars incident because every everybody else didn't really agree with us. I mean, most people kind of felt that this was political correctness run amok, and it's acting, and why shouldn't the best actor be cast in the part, regardless of ethnicity? And I actually feel that the casting issue is it's sort of complicated and nuanced, and there's a lot of interesting arguments on both sides. But what startled me, to be in the middle of a culture war incident, was how quickly it heated up until it kind of became this big media smackdown. And people went to their corners, had their position, kind of fought it out in the media, and the newspaper coverage was all about, oh, who was going to win? Was Jonathan Pryce going to be allowed to play his part on Broadway or not? And so there was no real discussion of the issues. And it was a little bit scary, frankly. I felt to be in the middle of all that. So I wrote a play about it called Face Value. And that was my next play to come to Broadway. And Face Value turned out to be a mammoth flop. It was a kind of a farce about mistaken racial identity, which I thought was kind of a good idea. But we tried it out in Boston, and the reviews were really bad. And I thought the review that kind of summed it all up was a headline that the headline read, "M Turkey." And so that play didn't really work, and we closed the previews. But I continued to think about it for many years, because I still thought the idea of creating a comedy of mistaken racial identity was a good one. Like, what does it mean to play another race? And to what extent do you play either the race that you're supposed to be a member of, or some other race in our real lives? I mean, how much is being a particular ethnicity? Is it real, or is it performative? So I thought about that for a long time, and about 8 or 9 years ago, somebody wrote a short called Asian Pride Quarter, a filmmaker named Greg Pak. And in it, he wrote a character called David Henry Hwang, who was trying to peddle politically correct Asian porn. And then he faxed me and said, "Do you want to play yourself?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So actually, you can still see us online. If you Google Asian Pride porn, you can watch it. And so I played myself in this short. And I continue to think about this notion of comedy mistaken racial identity. And between that and Doug Wright's play, I Am My Own Wife, which won the Pulitzer a number of years ago, where Doug put himself as a character into that play. And then watching too much Spinal Tap and Curb Your Enthusiasm, I started to think, it might be interesting to do a stage documentary, but a stage mockumentary. Like, okay, we have mockumentaries, we have stage documentaries, like, Voices of Scotland's Laramie Project, but I haven't really seen a stage mockumentary. And at this point, we're now about 4 or 5 years ago, multiculturalism, which was a new idea when I was starting out, was like, pretty much accepted, and it didn't really feel very fresh anymore. And I guess I was there for a lot of the rise of that. And there were things, I really believe in multiculturalism, and there were things that were really kind of extreme and, kind of silly about how it all happened. So I wanted to write a play that would have sort of both appreciate that multiculturalism was necessary, but also be able to make fun of some of the things that were silly about it. And I could have chosen another figure to make fun of, but it just seemed easier to write about myself, and then I was only offending me. So that became my comedy of mistaken racial identity, and it was a play called Yellow